It says starting. Okay. How's everybody doing? My name is Chief Amachi Apeto Buaru, and I am the founder of IIKDS, the International Indigenous Knowledge and Development Society. First of all, before we get started, let me go ahead and give you guys a little brief overview of our goals and the objectives of our society. The goal is to observe, preserve, develop, and transmit indigenous spiritual teachings to the Western world. Even further, it is to maintain the cultural integrity, the cultural identity, and history of pre-colonial peoples and societies for future generations, which is always a very important aspect and focus of what we're doing here. So, without further ado, let me do my traditional vampire. Okay, let's get started. So, of course, the title of the show here is Hoodoo, Conjure, Root Work, and African American Folk Magic, Part 2, Voodoo Dolls. Okay, so what I'm going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to give a brief overview of what the show is going to entail so that you guys can get a clear perspective of where we're going. Number one, what I'm going to do here is you may see a display of different herbs that are out here on the table. What I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you guys for the first time. I will introduce to you the components and the actual ingredients that go into making a voodoo doll. But let me be clear here. This is what we call, in the traditions of Timbukata and in the traditions of Hoodoo and African American folk magic, would be the Inyaba. This is the grandfather and grandmother, the great elder in the spiritual family of the voodoo dolls. So this is the overall general of voodoo dolls. This is not what many of you guys have seen in contemporary film or these books, these low-budget movies. This is the real deal here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to display a lot of the components here. I'm going to explain to you, number one, about the meanings and the underlying concepts that are behind these herbs in medicine. And then even further, I'm going to give you an example, and I'm going to show you a genie doll or a real traditional voodoo doll. In addition, I'm going to show you the pot, but then I'm going to go ahead and go into the history. I'm going to go into some misconceptions, and then I have a special treat for you guys. I have some very special people that are here that are joining us on this Google conference. These are students that are part of IIKDS, even further that are part of the Genie Doll course that just passed, that have actual first-hand experience with a Genie doll or with a voodoo doll. So I have some of them that are going to come on. I have two lovely sisters and a gentleman that are going to come on, and they're going to explain some of their experiences. They're going to explain some of the experiments that we did in the course so that they could see the power, the strength, and see the ability or even the spiritual reach of some of these spiritual tools, what we're calling the Genie doll, or what we call the Zinni doll, or what has been popularly called the voodoo doll in America. So let's go ahead and get started. Number one, what you see here in front of you are the natural components. Many of you guys hear me speaking often about Timbukata or Tima. Tima meaning traditional medicine, roots, herbs, magic, and then Bukata, the world soul and the spirit powers of the earth. And one of the things you hear me talk about on a consistent basis is that many of us have been given fruits that do not have seeds, meaning that we're giving traditional concepts. However, it's lacking the seeds or the roots that are connecting the individual back into nature. And what I'm describing here is that a lot of these voodoo dolls, a lot of these things that a lot of people have been using are store-bought factory manufactured products. My goal here and my charge to all of you out there, real traditional practitioners, by whatever name or whatever culture, is for you and I to come out and to demonstrate and to show the public the reality of our traditional spirit, the reality of hoodoo, conjure, root work, and African American folk magic, the reality of our traditional practices, so that we can demystify the misinformation that's being put out there by many of these commercialized outlets that are giving many of the true wisdom seekers, they're giving them these GMO products, these fruits that are not bearing seeds. So the goal here, without further ado, let's get into it. They call us root workers. They call it Timbukata, or traditional medicine. So these are the components that we're working with here. We're not working with store-bought components. We're working with the natural components of the earth. So let me explain, let me show you. These are some of the components that go into creating the genie doll or the voodoo doll. Let me explain really quick, briefly, before we get started. This is a course that is provided on the IIKDS platform. We have another course that's coming up in a couple months. Even further, well, in addition to that, I also am available to make these upon request for clients. However, there is an investigation period, spiritual readings and so forth that need to be done in order to make sure that all the right things are put together for you. Okay, but so let's go ahead and move forward. These are the natural components of what I've been describing when I talk about nature identity. I talk about the roots and the herbs. So let's give you an example. This is an example of a root, and I'll explain a little bit something about these roots as we move forward. This is just one component. This is what goes into a legitimate genie doll, or what you have called voodoo doll. These are specific grasses. We have here, we have different sticks. We have different barks. I have them tied together. We have different barks here. And then here's another type of stick or sticks. So to be clear, what you're looking at here, each one of these are specific roots, trees, barks, grasses, and so forth that are from specific locations and regions around the environment, within the ecosystems, within particular biomes, around the earth, in nature. These are the real natural components that are the foundation of what we call the juju doll, or the genie doll, what we call in tradition zini doll. Okay? These components, as I said before, many times I've explained about what we call the noli wuni, or the star, which are the characteristics, the personality traits, the interior components of individuals that manifest as personalities and abilities that exist as interior aspects inside of human beings. However, they also reflect in nature. And as I've said many times, for those of you guys who have watched some of the previous shows, that these abilities, these spiritual powers, are really reflections of what we call the Wu No Nam, which are the gods of our ancestors that exist in nature. So with that being said, many of these abilities, these powers that many people have called supernatural, they exist as components that reflect in the various locations and regions in nature. So these herbs, these roots, these different sticks and grasses and so forth that you see here, they are from the various components of those different landforms. They're from places and landscapes that are in nature, that hold specific power and characteristics and personalities of what you call the gods, or what we call the Wu No Nam. So let me be clear, this is what we call the mind. This is the basic component of the mind, because when you deal with spirits, you have two aspects. You have the mind, which is the mind or the characteristic or the trait or the quality of a particular mind, energy, or God or entity, or by whatever name you would like to call on. We call the Wu No Nam, or the Na Wuni. But then not only do you have the mind, but then you also have the personality, which the personality comes from the different configuration or the formulas of these medicines as they're combined and as they're put together in their organic state. As I said again, this is not anything that you're buying out of the store. This is something that you have to go out into nature, you have to collect, and that you're putting together. So in the combination of these herbs, they then create qualities within yourself. And this is what we're going to get into very briefly. We're going to talk about spiritual engineering, because this is what the juju doll or the genie doll, or what you've been called the voodoo doll, this is what it is, its original purpose. The original purpose is about spiritual development, developing oneself spiritually by gathering the various components and characteristics of nature and the qualities and the personality traits of the Wununam that reflect in nature, and then taking them, creating these different formulas, and then grafting them to yourself. And what's happening here is that these herbs then attune you to specific frequencies, very similar to attuning a particular radio station or tuning yourself into a particular channel. And we're going to talk about this later on. These are the natural components that go into the indigenous communication devices. And this is what we're dealing with here. I'll say this, and I'll say this one more time. No one has a problem with the idea of a cell phone or television being created out of inanimate objects, metals, microchips, plastics, and that those plastics and metals are then able to translate invisible signals that are moving throughout the ionosphere, or they're moving throughout the atmosphere, and then they're able to translate them into audio or different sound, visual signals, images, and so forth. So no one will discount that now that we're living in this modern age. However, we're still struggling with the idea that the same concepts can be accomplished by other inanimate objects. And this is the science of Timbuktu. This is the science of the root worker, of the real indigenous conjurer or hoodoo man or African American folk magic. This is our science about putting together these different formulas that create specific communication devices, which you are calling the juju doll. So I want to show you this one more time so that you can see these components, so that you see these are natural components that go in to creating what you're dealing with here. So if you're getting these things from some store or from some factory, you've been tricked, you've been fooled. So what's happened what happens with these herbs is that these herbs are put together. These herbs are taken through a purification, meaning there's a ceremony of purification in order to purify, in order to activate, in order to put specific power into these particular herbs so that they have specific action. These are done by particular shrines and so forth. Okay? When this is done, these components that I'm showing here, they go into what is known as a spiritual bath. The spiritual bath is the first component, the first part of actually grafting this particular power, the particular mind, the particular personality and characteristic traits of the gods, which then translates onto yourself and grafts to yourself a type of spiritual engineering, as I said before, that attunes you to a particular frequency, that allows you to have the ability to create phenomena, because this is attuning you to nature. Remember, as you deal with these traditional concepts, we're not dealing with inorganic components. We're dealing with organic components that come from nature that are going to link you and connect you to nature, that are going to connect you to the powers, the minds of mentality, to the causal realities, to the transcausal realities that exist in nature. That's important. You can't get this from purchasing something from a store. You have to go into the store of nature. Okay? When these are put together in a spiritual bath, then they're able to attune you to particular frequencies, as I said before. So this is the first component. And then with these components here, they come together to make a genie or a voodoo doll. We take these components, they're broken down, they're tied, they're put together, and then they make a genie doll or a voodoo doll, which I'm going to show you. I'll give you an example. This is the first. This is the first part. This is the pot for the genie doll. Okay, and the genie doll here. This is the mother and father of what you're calling a voodoo doll. This is the genie head. This here is the equivalent of our indigenous technology, which these are ancient indigenous communication devices that give us the ability to have a dimensional link to nature and to the components of nature. This is what we call a genie doll. So you can look at it. This is the end result of these different herbs and so forth that are here. They're broken down and they're tied with different strings. I don't know if you guys can see. You guys can see that here. There are different strings. These are the herbs that are inside. They're tied to a particular stick. We wrap it with string and we tie it. We fasten it. These are the feathers from the fowl that was used to purify this particular genie doll. Now, as I said before, these genie dolls are spiritual tools that are communication devices. They give the practitioner the ability to not only directly receive, as I said before, remember you're attuning yourself from the first process of the bath. Then as you actually construct this genie doll, then you actually are attuned to specific frequencies where the Wu No Nam, the gods of our ancestors that exist in nature, you're then attuned to that. And as being attuned, your body becomes a natural receiver, and even further, a transmitter, which we'll get into a little further. But with the idea of developing spiritual abilities, you become a receiver, meaning that you are able to receive frequencies, language, spiritual language, that then translates through your central nervous system, through your sight, your sensory perception, your hearing, your thoughts, the same way that a television or your cell phone is able to translate invisible signals into audio signals or video visible signals. This is our indigenous technology here. And yes, as a transmitter, I talked about a receiver as far as developing spiritual abilities, but as a transmitter as well, this is where you guys have gotten a lot of the misinformation. You see, here's a needle. The way that these traditional genie dolls work is that you talk into the needle, and when you talk into the needle, you take the needle and then you take it and then you push it inside of the genie doll, and it actually moves and puts into action specific phenomena. But let me explain something very briefly before we move on. These genie dolls are not meant for revenge. They're not meant for harm. They're meant to defend, but they're most importantly, they're meant to develop you spiritually. They're meant to develop you a spiritual companion that will give you guidance. That will give you guidance. You're talking about a personal spiritual guide that will give you the ability to have a dimensional link to the spiritual world so that you yourself can move to and fro in the spiritual world. That you too will be able to have the ability to create specific phenomena, to create specific miracles, to heal, to protect. This is what this is for. Far too long have we been given the information that these are just used as tools of devilishment or of destruction. These are actual tools that are used to protect the community. These are tools that are used in order to heal sick. These are tools that are used in order to protect. And these are tools that are used to develop. And yes, you are taking these pins the same way that you've been programmed in your movies and your different books about pushing the needles in order to cause harm. No, you are pushing these needles. And as you talk about the things that you want to put in action, and you're pushing these needles there, as you're pushing these needles into the genie doll, you're doing this in order to heal. You're doing this in order to protect. You're doing this in order to foster happiness and unity. You're doing this in order to develop things that are creative instead of destructive. This is what the genie doll does. This is a very important component for you guys to understand, because we've been given a lot of misinformation about the genie doll. We've been given a lot of misinformation about the voodoo doll. We've been told that these are components that are used in order to cause harm. And someone somehow has intentionally neglected to tell you that these were our ancient spiritual and communication devices. See, someone has forgot to tell you that these were devices that helped to create a dimensional link that helped to develop characteristics and personalities, resurrecting one back into the Wu No Nam by the knowledge of collecting certain reflections and certain parts and components of nature, putting them together, and then having you, giving you the sequential identity and natural mapping of the minds and the mentalities and the behaviors that exist within nature. This is what these components have always been for. And it is my job, and then it is the job of many of you out there that I'm giving the charge to out here, to identify this misinformation, to identify the misinformation about a lot of the things that people have seen. For example, many of you guys may ask, they say, well, where does this pushing the needles and so forth in the voodoo doll, what we call the genie doll, where does this concept come from? Well, as we move further from postmodern into more of the pre-modern, into more of the postmodern era, we were using needles. However, in our most traditional sense, we would take wooden stakes, considerably larger than this one, but we would take wooden stakes and we would move to specific locations, regions, and points where there are specific trees, where there are specific identifiable points in nature that are these dimensional links or connections to our ancestors or our gods of our ancestors that exist in nature. And we would do the same thing that is done with the needles. We would talk into the stakes. We would tie herbs such as this and others. We would tie them to these sticks. We would tie them around. We would create something similar to this, but many, and we would talk into them, and then we would take it and we would pound it into the ground next to the roots or the base of the tree. This is why they call this root people, or root workers, because we would put our stakes, our needles, into the ground, thereby directing the specific forces, the minds and the mentalities that exist within those particular locations to take action and to move into positive action for the community. I want to talk to you guys a lot about these things. However, I don't want to take up all the time. Instead of just giving you a lot of lecture and a lot of ideas about what these are, I first want to say this to you guys so you guys understand really quick so you guys can get this. So many of you guys may say, well, this doesn't look like a voodoo doll. It looks like a bunch of sticks that have been put together with feathers, and that's the trick. The trick is that this is how we originally made our dolls. We made it originally like this, and then we would clothe it. We would put clothes over it. We would put a face or a head over it, so that when someone sees it, they would just say, oh, it's a doll. If they would happen to look under it, they'll say, oh, well, no, that's just the wooden structure of the doll. But the real power and the real strength of the voodoo doll was underneath the clothes, was underneath the hair and the fancy things that we put out in front as a display. What was underneath was something like this that we would hold, that we would talk to, that we would spit the alcohol on, that we would take and that we would blow, that we would blow the powder on, that we would take the needles in order to push them, in order to create positive action. And after we did our work, we would take them and purify them with fowls and so forth and other livestock. And then after they dried and everything settled, then we would put the clothes back on, and then we would put it out and display in front for people to see. All they would see is the doll, but the real power that was there was underneath. But what I want to do, instead of just talking, I want to give you guys a chance to speak to some people, some very powerful people, some students of IKDS that have got the chance to actually work, have gone through the initiatory process of the genie doll, and have got a chance to actually experience the phenomena themselves. So without further ado, let's Sabira, would you like to give a little bit of your experiences, and just real quick an overview? One of the things that we do in the class setting is that in the class setting we take these herbs and these components. These herbs and these components are sent to students. Then during the class process of about a month, then I'm teaching how to construct and to put together the genie doll. But then even further, after things are created, there's a spiritual bath, but then there's an experimental phase where I have students actually experimenting so that they can actually see the reach and the capability of the genie doll. So it's going to be good for you guys there to actually see firsthand, not just from me giving a lecture, but firsthand from some of the students to see, what their experiments were and what type of results that they saw, they were able to observe from their experiments. So, Sabir, without further ado, this is a very powerful sister. Sabir, if you'd like to go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Chief. So I guess I'll start by showing my genie. This is what I constructed, and it's a process of listening to your spirit, your genie, as it's talking to you once we took the bath. And so getting on to the experiment, I had a client that I was doing work, chose to pray for and do some work for, and she wanted a job. This particular company she wanted to work for, she's been applying for, I think she said 4 years, and couldn't even get a first interview. I took it to my genie and pushed the pins, directed the energy, and said what this woman wanted. And literally, I did the work at about 10 a.m. on a Thursday. Friday, the very next day at about 11, she called me and said, "You will not believe this, but they called me for an interview." Not only that, but she went and she did the first interview. She said they'll probably never call me back. About 7 days later, they called her back for a second interview, which she goes on the 21st of this month. So that was just one. The other one was for myself, doing the work for myself. I actually just redirected money. There was a middleman between myself and some clients, 3 clients, and I told the energy to shift and go around those 3 middlemen and to have the money come directly to me. And again, within, I'd say, 24 to 48 hours of me doing the work with the genie, I got calls from all 3 of my clients saying, "We don't want to be in the middle anymore. It's too much hassle," whatever their reason was, but that the money was coming directly to me. All 3 different clients of mine who do not know each other. And this was within 48 hours of me pushing the needles and doing the prayer work with the telling the genie what I wanted it to do. So it's been a very, I mean, if I didn't know better, I would say it was unbelievable, but I've seen it, and it is amazing.
Wow. See, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that, sister. Thank you. Let me introduce another powerful student. Torrance is a very powerful student. Torrance, would you like to give some of your experiences and talk a little bit about your experiment and what results that you actually saw in the class?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, this is my doll, my genie doll. So, in my experiment was one of my best friends, he has cancer on his spine, on his lower back. And what I did is I went to the genie, and I asked the genie to relieve him of his pain, because he really can't sleep at night. He walks with a limp, and he's always in excruciating pain. And I actually received a waking vision of it was a waking dream where he and I were in the gym, and he was leaning up against a pillar, and he was in pain. So I asked him what was wrong. He said his back was hurting. So I told another guy in the gym to go around to the back of the gym and get three plants. Well, actually, three flowers in the back. They were yellow and they had like a little bulb in the middle. And so the guy in the dream went back. He got the plants and he came back. And I took them and I crushed the plants and made a paste and I put it on his back. So that was the dream. And like a day or so later, I was outside on my porch and looked over in my neighbor's yard, and there was those same flowers in the yard. So at that point, I said, well, there's no such thing as coincidences. So I went out, called my neighbor, asked if I could use, three of her plants. She said, absolutely. So I came back in, crushed up the plants, made a paste, gave it to my buddy, and gave him instructions. And I actually received specific instructions in the dream was for me to make the paste and to go to the genie shrine and pray over it for 3 days and then give it to him and have him to apply it for 3 days, no more, no less. So I gave him the paste, gave him the instructions, and a few days passed. Like the next day he had chemo. And usually, actually the day before he had chemo, usually, at the chemo, he's just in excruciating pain. I saw him 3 days later, and he said, I don't know, what that is you gave me, or I don't even know if it's actually working. He said, all I know is for the last few nights, I have not had any pain, and I've been able to sleep through the night, and that's the first time I've been able to do that in at least 3 to 3.5 months at the minimum. So, I mean, the results I got were just phenomenal. I was blown away. As a matter of fact, I was actually rendered speechless. I didn't know what to tell him after that. I was like, wow, which is amazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. So this is important for you guys out there to see that, number one, these spiritual communication devices actually are there to guide you, to give you information that will give you the ability to become better healers, better protectors. This is something that's important because we, as responsible traditional practitioners, need to introduce a lot of our traditional concepts, but introduce them in a way that is constructive in our communities and that is not destructive. Far too long, there's a lot of us that are introducing these concepts, but we're introducing them as means to destroy instead of means to create, protect, to heal. And that's why, this story, that's a very powerful thing that you just described for us. Thank you for that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And last but not least, Janice, very powerful sister that's a part of the class. Would you like to give us an example of, give us an example of how does your genie doll interact with you? How do you know that your genie doll is interacting with you? If you could talk a little bit about that, and then even further, then you could talk a little bit about your experiment and what your experiment was and the results that you were able to see, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Chief. So first, let me give everybody a view of my doll. If you can see, I'm here in my shrine room. I don't know if you can see her or not. That's my doll. So when I first started doing the ritual and taking the bath, and I started to connect with my genie, and I started to have dreams, and the way this would work is my genie would come to me, and we would develop a bond, and we developed a friendship from the very start. And just most recently, I've had some issues with self-esteem and things going on throughout my life. So just recently, I had a dream where there was some activities going on in a dream, and some people were doing and saying some things that was really getting to me emotionally. And then in the dream, I knew it was my genie doll, because one thing that I usually do when I come down and I talk to my genie is, because I designed her to look like a person, like the way that you were describing. Sometimes when I'm talking to my genie, I would fix her hair. And in the dream, after this emotional event happened, my genie visited me in the dream, and she looked like much like my spirit doll. And she came to me and, comforted me about the situation and said to me, do you want me to take care of it? So the genie acts as a protector, a friend, and I knew it was a genie doll because in the dream I actually moved the tuft of her hair the way that I do when I in real life when I'm talking to her. So that was very emotional and touching because it lets me know that I'm forming a bond with my genie doll. So I talk to her every day. Most recently, I had a very big event that happened. It was a miracle. Um, as far as I'm concerned, like with my job, I had been in search of a job advancement for some time, and there was one particular job that I was really interested in, and I applied for it. I hadn't really gotten any feedback, and so I did the experiment as chief directed with my genie. I just went and I talked to her, uh, pushed the pins, told her, hey, I need some visibility, um, and I said a key word. I said I would like to have choices, with job advancement. And the very next day, and this really tripped me out actually. The type of job I work in IT security, and a lot of times when you get these types of jobs, you have to not only go in for a phone call first, then an interview, and then they call you in also sometimes for a working interview to see if you know your skills. And so I got a call from the recruiter, and they were like, "You will not believe what just happened." And I'm like, "What?" I thought they were going to invite me in for an interview. He says, "You have the job." I'm like, "How is that possible?" I didn't even talk to these people who I had applied. I just filled out the form. I had not even had one conversation. And he was like, I have not seen any of this in all my career. And he was calling up his friends who were recruiters, and they had not seen this. And this job offer, let me just say, it's the best offer I've seen throughout my career. And that was pretty amazing to be offered this job, sight unseen, no interview. And then the very next day, I had an interview with another job. And as soon as I got in my car, and it wasn't like 5 minutes away, I got a phone call and says they want to offer you the job. So I got choices. They were great choices. And, recently was in a situation where now the two companies are competing, raising the salary, increasing the benefits to see which way I want to go. So, I mean, that was really powerful and really amazing. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Look, I want to thank you guys for taking the time and sharing your experiences. Because this, you guys didn't have to do that, and I really want to thank you personally for coming and sharing your experiences, so that people can grow and can experience something different as far as ideals and perspectives that are outside of what a lot of people have pushed on them, as far as what the voodoo doll or the genie doll is for. So I want to thank you guys for coming on and sharing your experiences.
Thank you, Chief.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chief.
You're welcome. Everybody, it's time to stop just reading. It's time to stop just researching. It's time to start participating in the spiritual revolution that's happening here. It's time to start participating in your indigenous spiritual practices. It's time to start developing yourself in a way that you're going to develop your personal and your spiritual identity in ways that will amaze you. This is important. This is the time that a lot of people in a lot of different monotheistic cultures have prophesied about the time and the reawakening. This is what we call the wet season of existence, or what most people call the spring season of existence. This is the time when many of the aspects of nature that have appeared to have no life. This is the time when many people, cultures, and so forth that have appeared to have no life begin to awaken, the same way that the spring season brings new life and vitality to landscapes, to trees. Trees blossom and bear fruit. This is your time to become what we call Tinbihi, a child of the land. This is your time to reconnect back to the gods of your ancestors that exist in nature. And even further, reconnect to your own identity. Not just your own personal and cultural identity, but then even further, your identity that exists in nature. Below, underneath, we're going to display a few links that you can, number one, there's going to be a link where you can actually become a part of the next class that will be available. Number two, there's also going to be a link below that will give you the ability to contact me, so that if a genie doll or something like this is something that you're interested in, that we can start some type of consultation so that I could personally make something like this for you. And then number three, there's also going to be a link for those who are interested and want to become a part of our email list, so that you can receive future information about what IIKDS is doing. Once again, visit the website www.iikds.org. You guys have a good evening. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Chief. Good night.
Thanks. Good night.
Good night.